Just a few house cleaning items. We do have the ability to, comment in the chat. We'll do about a 30-minute presentation today. Ashley and I will both speak, and then we'll go ahead and we will make sure that we do a little Q&A at the end. So thank you all for joining. This is a really important time to advocate and support multilingual learners in this country. We are facing some very challenging headwinds, but the good news as it relates to the work that we do in our K-12 schools is it's not red versus blue. It's black and white. Parent engagement is a catalyst for student success. So joining me today, Dr. Ashley Crown. Really excited to have her today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ashley. Would you go ahead and introduce yourself and a little bit about the work that you're doing at District 70 schools as it relates to supporting multilingual families?
Absolutely. I've been in District 70. I think this is my 18th year now, and I've been a school psychologist for the majority of my career. But in the past couple of years, I've moved into a coordinator role at the district level. And so part of the work I've been doing is with our multilingual teachers over the past couple of years. And in that, I've entered a new world, a lot of new information to me, and also helped with a lot of initiatives to support our multilingual students. And one of them was working with Piedmont Global in securing translation and interpretation services so we could have those fluidly when we need them for a variety of situations with parents and students. And so that's what I'm here to talk about, how that's impacted us and how it's been such a great asset.
Amazing, Ashley. We appreciate your partnership, and certainly, there's been evolution towards the demographics in the community, and then also some evolving legislation in special education within Illinois. And I'm looking forward to discussing that a little bit with you as well. Let's kick this off and let's talk a little bit about best practices for working with an interpreter. I think that'll be a good way to start this conversation off. So as you know, interpretation is about more than word for word translation. It's about building trust, clarity, and connection. It's about giving families meaningful participation in their sons and daughters' educations. There are so many different ways that we can, and this is a good thing, there are so many different ways that we can foster a culture of understanding. Google Translate, speech-to-text AI translation devices, all these many different tools we have. But really, when you think about it within a special education setting, it's so important to be able to engage that family and make them feel heard, make them feel like they have an opportunity to really be engaged in that process. And well-prepared human interpreters, there really is not there's not a better solution out there in the market. Nobody's perfect, especially us humans. But as you might imagine, it's a tremendous opportunity to really drive family engagement in the hopes that we can really improve student outcomes. Of course, we want to reduce confusion and ultimately drive, student achievement, and giving those families an opportunity to have meaningful participation in their sons and daughters' education is a great way to do that. So can you talk to us a little bit about your experience with that within the district?
Yeah. Yeah, I think when I look at it from my perspective, someone sitting on an intervention team or a special education team, parents are the most important members of our teams. They know the student best, and we need their authentic voice included in our conversations about students and making sure that our students have the right supports and are getting their educational needs met. And I think it's been so helpful to ensure that we have someone there to, like I said, speak their authentic voice. In so many scenarios, in order to get student supports or just to share information about a student's progress, we want to make sure that the parents are fully informed. They need to know they're part of our team and they have a say and they have input. And in order for them to do that, we have to give them language access if they need it. It's just a key to showing them that they're an important part of our team and they feel a partnership in that. Then it's not just information the school is giving them. It's information that they are part of sharing and they are part of that team. And I think it makes them feel heard when they have that access.
That's awesome. Now you mentioned, a part of the team. So, we want our interpreters to feel like they are part of the team. When you have a complex IEP or an expulsion hearing, it's really important to give those interpreters some information, some context up front about what might be going on inside that meeting. And the
Yep.
example that I like to use is, it'd be like if you were charged with a crime, Ashley, you're a criminal, and you hired an attorney,
Yikes.
and you didn't tell the attorney anything about what happened within the situation, and you just said, all right,
Yeah.
go out there and do your best. So, that's the
Yeah.
example I like to use when I'm talking with school districts about, how we can set our interpreters up for success and preparing them in advance for the meeting. So, can you talk to me a little bit about, clarifying expectations within that work and that type of engagement?
Yeah, I think a lot of what you said is a good point. What is the purpose of the meeting? What are we here for? What are we here to discuss? What do we hope to accomplish in the meeting? I think another thing that it's been important in terms of just like clarifying expectations. Some of our parents are somewhat fluent in multiple languages, and they have a comfort in having a translator or interpreter there in case there's confusion, I think that to let the interpreter know that, you don't necessarily need to do word for word. This parent has said they're fairly comfortable, but if they have a question, they're going to ask you to clarify and interpret for them in those scenarios. So letting them know that in advance too, so they know their role is there is as a support instead of interpreting word for word. They're there as a support to interpret when the parents has questions. So that's another piece of it, I think, in preparing them for our meetings.
Absolutely. So, a best practice that we'll talk about is just speaking in short, simple sentences, pausing often, avoiding idioms, slang, jargon that just, is not going to translate well. And this is especially important in the special education setting. And then, of course, we want to, speak in the first person, speak directly to that family, and let the interpreter kind of serve as a conduit. I'll share a story with you really quick. I was working for a Chinese translation agency. So my boss was based out of Shanghai, and her English was good but limited. And she was asking me to go on a travel trip to California. And I said, yeah, I'm game. And she looked at me funny. And then she goes, you know what, Mark, I also want you to go to Southern California too. I want you to go call on these video game companies. Sure, I can play ball. And then the tone changed. And she said, Mark, this is not a game. We want you to go close this business. This is not time to goof around. And in American culture, that was just a casual use of language that said, yeah, I got you. I'm going to
Sure.
be on the plane. I'm ready to go. And she took that as meaning something entirely different. And if you've ever worked with me, I'm not out here playing games, but it was just one of those really humbling experiences working in a multicultural environment that really taught me that, keep it short, keep it simple, be direct, avoid those idioms, the slang, the jargon, especially when you're speaking with people with limited English proficiency. It's going to serve you well. Have you run into any examples of that yet, Ashley, or is that still to come for you?
Yeah, no, I have run into it, and I think something that I try to remind our teams of are not using some of our jargon or like our acronym. We use a lot of acronyms in education, and anybody out there who's watching this who's in education is nodding their head. We could have like a literal binder of all of our acronyms. And so being cognizant of not using those when we're speaking, use the full term, like RTI, response to intervention, not using RTI, using response to intervention or MTSS. We use a lot of a lot of either acronyms or abbreviations for things or slang terms like you're saying. And I think it's really important that we make sure to use the formal way of speaking for all the different assessments we talk about giving and the different, or if I say, oh, in their Studio One class, what does that mean to anyone? Nothing. To me, that's like a homeroom class, the first period of their school day, so making sure we're clarifying those. And we talk to our teams about that and making sure that we're prepared in advance to be sure to be thinking about that as you're sharing information. And if one of our teammates happens to use, that slang or the jargon, to kind of hop in and clarify what that means to make sure that everybody has a good understanding. And that's good practice in any kind of meeting, whether there's an interpreter or not. That's something that we need to, always be doing, but it's extra important in this scenario.
Absolutely. Another best practice would be to respect the interpreter's role. So give that interpreter time to interpret, clarify, ask questions. Anybody who knows me knows that I am not the most patient person. I think the marketing folks might have put this slide in this bullet point in here just for me. But no, it is a best practice to be patient, to avoid interrupting. I don't interrupt people, but and remember that the interpreters, are going to follow professional standards, of course. Confidentiality, neutrality is very important to us. We do align with HIPAA and FERPA standards, so that's a very
Mhm.
important component. So, how are you sharing that information out with your teams?
Yeah, just reminding them that you have to give them time to take in that information and interpret it back out, and then time for them to allow the parents to then think and have questions back. Again, a lot of the information we may share, like let's say at a special education eligibility meeting, doesn't always directly translate in language. And so it takes a moment. And while they're experts in their area, so they are comfortable in sharing that information, sometimes it takes a moment to do that interpretation. So allowing the time and being patient and not feeling that you have to jump in during a silence. Sometimes it's purposeful. So again, good practice in any meeting, but especially when there's this extra layer of interpreting very important information about a student who's it's somebody's child. And so you want to make sure that information is shared fully.
So important to build trust through cultural awareness. So we want to be
Mhm.
mindful of cultural norms that might affect tone, body language, responses. Even like the colors you use in marking, a test or a subject. So, in
Yeah.
Chinese culture, red is lucky. In certain Middle Eastern countries, red would not be, a type of marking that you'd want to see on a letter home or something like that. It would incite some different feelings than it would in different cultures. And of course, in America, I think we're
Mhm.
kind of neutral as to what colors are being used, but you want to be mindful of cultural norms. I think educators do a tremendous job of creating respectful, welcoming environments. And of course, that's going to go a long way in terms of, driving engagement and creating trust with families. And then, of course, following small cues like patience and tone can certainly go a long way. But then you also want to be mindful of not overusing cultural norms, and just kind of being a little bit more neutral in that. So
Mhm.
references to the Kardashians are not going to carry the same weight or be as recognizable as they might be with an American family or something like that. So
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
important.
I think you want everybody to feel safe and welcomed in the environment. And I think, as a staff, a school district staff, we do a lot of work on cultural awareness because it's important in all facets of what we do here. And we want to make sure that, we're aware of how all of our cultural differences impact each other. And especially in a scenario like this, it's more pronounced. I mean, we're speaking multiple languages and we're coming from different cultures. So it's really important to be cognizant of that.
Awesome. All right, and now we're going to talk a little bit about best practices for scheduling an interpreter. This will be, good for
Mhm.
folks to know. Oops, did I go the wrong way? Okay, so we always want to make sure that we plan ahead. Again, if there's going to be a
Yeah.
complicated engagement, we want that information as soon as possible so that we can share a little bit of context with that family. Of course, you want to avoid, last minute gaps. Of course, we do have the ability to provide on-demand interpretation in over 100 languages. So, while we understand that, a family could come in and you might not have known that they needed an interpreter, we certainly have the ability to, make those, requests in a, quick amount of time. But pre-scheduling interpreters allows us to be a little bit more selective with who we're able to assign, especially, if
Mhm.
it's going to be a special education meeting. We have entire roster of interpreters that are focused on education. I think that's a great differentiator for PGLS in this and Piedmont Global in this space. And then, of course, you want to schedule at the same time you book the meeting. That's just a best practice. So if you know you have that
Yeah.
interpreter, there's no reason to wait. Go ahead and just make that appointment and that notification. We do have cancellation policies for a reason. So if you do have to cancel that, that's great. We can do that within a 48-hour window, and it's no problem. But go ahead and schedule that interpreter early and often, and we look forward to supporting that, of course.
Yeah, I think one thing I reiterate with our teams is remember this is a legal right anybody has at a meeting to fully understand and fully have access to the information that's being shared. It's not just a convenience that we do it. It's a legal right, and so we need to take that very seriously. And all those tips that you shared, making sure that you do it in advance, and as when you're scheduling the meeting, you schedule an interpreter. It's to be taken seriously.
Absolutely, Ashley. Language access is still a civil right in this country, and that's an
Yep.
important reminder
Yep.
for everybody, and a wonderful thing. We certainly want to add time for interpretive conversations.
Yep.
We use the 50% rule. So if a special education meeting is going to typically take an hour to schedule, you want to give that an hour and a half just to make sure that you have time. And it can be challenging to schedule special education meetings. You have, schedules all across the district that you have to consider, but you also have to consider the family's schedule. So, there's nothing worse than
Yep.
scheduling a meeting and not being able to address all the items that you wanted to discuss within it.
Right, right. Yeah, definitely. You don't want to cut short on information. And again, it's important. It's all important information. So we don't want to have to cut pieces out in order to make time. So overscheduling, I always talk about overscheduling time by a little bit at least, like you said, the 50% rule, but also, a little bit of a buffer time at the beginning and the end of the meeting so that one, you can prepare the interpreter at the very beginning and have that time. And then and then make sure that you have time to wrap it up in the end and really answer all questions and make sure all information is shared.
And then, I did touch on this a little bit earlier, but, you want to prep interpreters like they're
Mhm.
any other team member. So, share the document, share information. Now, if it's a, simple parent teacher conferences, we don't need to see the report card in
Sure.
advance of the meeting. But, I'm talking about complicated engagements with a lot of moving parts, or if there's anything that you might think is going to be uncomfortable within that situation, or if there's anything,
Mhm.
specific, jargon or, different language that's going to be included in there that you want to brief the interpreter on. We
Yep.
certainly encourage you guys all to do that.
Yeah, we often will project things on our screen or share on our screen if we're virtual. And I think it's important that the interpreter has a copy. So always, making sure you have a copy of the paperwork if we're sitting at a table for a meeting, have a copy of what we're going over so they can visually be looking at it and not having to necessarily look up at a screen or something that might be written really small up on the
Right.
screen so that they have it in front of them so they can fully share that information without question.
It's a good thought.
Mhm.
Okay, so knowing the modality, so there's a couple different offerings that we have within
Mhm.
the interpretation space. We do on-site interpretation, we do over-the-phone interpretation, and we do video remote interpretation. So knowing the modality that's going to make the most sense in the moment is really important. Um, Not only from an ease of use standpoint, but also from a cost standpoint, right? So like if we're pre-scheduling VRI services, there's a 30-minute minimum on that. If we're talking about doing telephonic interpretation and you can use on demand services for a quick phone call home or just a quick clarification within a meeting, that can be a real cost saver for districts as well. So um,
Yep.
having somebody like yourself who's kind of the champion for language access at District 70 schools, it's really wonderful to just be able to understand where the cost savings exist, where the best practice or best processes for choosing the right modality for the moment. And then of course something that happens all too often within the video remote interpretation is we'll get links for a Zoom call that are incomplete or
Yeah.
inaccurate, and then all of a sudden we have the interpreter sitting there and waiting, and family sitting there and waiting, everyone's sitting there and waiting and looking at each other and wondering how things are going to get started. So really
Right.
important to
Yeah.
test your links and make sure that everybody has access to those meetings. And when you do go ahead and schedule those pre-scheduled VRI meetings, just make sure that you have the right links in there. Is a good practice, a good process.
Yeah, the ML team and I had sat down and went through and kind of identified the different modalities and how we'd use them for different types of meeting or communication with parents and made a little I'll call it cheat sheet so that our teams have, this is best for this is best for this is best for this, and then also indicated any of the technologies that we would need in order to make that most effective. I don't know if anybody else uses Google Meets. We've had an issue recently where if you are the one who creates the meeting, you're the host, no one else can get in unless you're in it. So if I'm out sick, and that meeting needs to happen virtually, now no one can get in it with that link because I'm not there. So that's another thing we tried to make a system to make sure that those things don't happen. And so we're prepared in advance and made ourselves a little cheat sheet so everybody can use it and make sure that they know the best modality and all the technologies they'll need and, to be prepared in advance.
You're on top of it. That's awesome. We'll talk a little bit about qualified and trained interpreters in a little
Yeah.
bit when we get into some of the its guidelines from ISB that came out in 2023. But it's really important to use qualified, trained interpreters. It doesn't make sense to grab the gym teacher out of class just because he speaks a little bit of Spanish. He's not going to be well versed in a special education setting. It's just it's not a good practice. It's not the right thing to do for the families, and it's really not the right thing to do for that teacher who's now pulling double duty
Hmm.
as well. So certainly
Yeah.
compliance is a big consideration in Illinois. We have evolving standards for what it means to be a qualified interpreter within a special education setting, which I think is absolutely just wonderful. It's so rare that I'm
Hmm.
so boastful about lawmakers in Illinois. We tend to send our governors to jail every couple terms. Somebody's getting locked up here in Illinois. So being proud and boastful about lawmakers in Illinois does not come naturally to me. But compliance is very important, and adhering
Yep.
to FERPA standards and HIPAA standards and confidentiality is paramount. So that's something that we take very seriously at PGLS. I know school districts across the country do as well.
Yeah, and one of the pieces of the trained, and this may come up later, forgive me if I'm jumping ahead, but when we're using the platform, there's education and then there's mental health. And one thing that we've experienced a lot is our mental health challenges, especially with our, I'd say more of our middle school population, but some of our elementary school as well. And we've used that as a choice before to choose a mental health professional if we have to have a very, very, specific conversation with parents that involves that. To have a mental health specialist as the interpreter is it's very useful in that situation. And so it's nice that you can identify, okay, this is an educational specialist in terms of interpretation, but then there's also the mental health piece. So knowing that those are both available is really great.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, we also have our interpreters broken down into that healthcare bucket as well. So, like, if it was a
Yep.
school nurse who had to make phone calls home,
Sure.
absolutely,
The
take
good one.
advantage of, those healthcare
Yeah.
interpreters as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Now we're going to get a little bit into the special education laws that came out. And I just want to tee this up a little bit for Ashley. So, um, ISB has released some really progressive and proactive laws and guidelines around special education as it relates to language access. And of course, I'm really
Hmm.
proud and excited by that. And it's a really wonderful thing. And the reason I'm sharing it on this call, of course, we have a national audience, but the reason I'm sharing it on this call is there's a lot of examples within that could be considered best practices for school districts across the country. So I think it's great to celebrate, the work that we're doing on this front within special education, but then also, taking these best practices and sharing them out, with the community at abroad is a really important thing to do. And I hope school districts across the country look at this and consider incorporating some of these best practices into their districts, into their engagement policies, and consider that a little bit. But Ashley, talk to us a little bit about what you've been hearing about some of this legislation.
Yeah, there's a lot of timelines involved in special education in terms of sending paperwork home in a timely manner and giving parents drafts in advance of the meeting. And all of this involves ensuring that you have checked with parents to see if they need any of the documentation translated. There's even check boxes on our forms where we have to indicate that we asked the parent and we asked what they needed. Do they need the forms translated? Do they need an interpreter? Do they need one or the other or both? So these are really important important piece is, again, like I said before, it's not a convenience factor. It's a legal obligation. So we need to make sure to do that. Google Translate or other, types of AI kind of things are great in some ways, but it's only so good. And when you're using like what we talked about before, jargon and acronyms and different educational slang, it doesn't always translate well. And so a more sophisticated method is often needed in order to translate some of that information. And I think it's good to be aware of that and give parents the opportunity to say, this translated document, it didn't make much sense to me. Can you can you please, go back and clarify some of these sections or have it retranslated because I think it wasn't accurate. So it's important to be able to provide that level of access when needed, especially when it's not as, if it's a language that we don't use as commonly, relying on something like Google Translate. I mean, I don't know. I actually don't know another language. And so I wouldn't be able to say if it interpreted it well or not. So I think that's a really important piece of making sure our paperwork is legally sound in whatever language needs to be in. It can't just be, again, it can't just be a convenience factor. It needs to be something that we provide legally to make sure the parents can be fully informed and fully participatory in the process.
Yeah, that's a great point. Language is so subjective too, right? So
Yeah.
a professional process to go through that and give parents access to reliable translated materials, so important so that they can
Yeah.
have participation. um,
Well, and in many
and
cases, we're asking for parental consent. They need to understand what they're consenting for. It can't just be, it has to be a fully translated and understandable document.
absolutely, absolutely. Any other thoughts about the legislation that we have out there?
No, I think there's always it's always going to be new and changing and adding, adding pieces. And in the end, why they add to it, why we have to, send a 3-day draft and why we have to provide copies within so many days of the meeting. It's all about ensuring that parents are fully able to participate. And so I think that those dates and timelines are going to keep changing. That's like it's part of my job to make sure I'm on top of the changes in the laws. But what we need to know is just know what they are and ensure we're following them. And part of that is the language notification now needs to be followed.
Awesome, awesome. All right, that's great, Ashley. I do want to tell one more story here before I sign off, and this kind of relates to like my mission and some of the challenges that I'm facing as I work to promote language access across the country. And I work with school districts from coast to coast, many of the largest school districts in the country. And I was having a conversation with one of those school districts, and we were talking about all the services that we provide, and on-site interpretation, remote interpretation, video remote, machine translation with post editing, translation using our
Sure.
traditional TEP process, all that. We got to telephonic interpretation, and they said, "Oh, Mark, we don't have to talk about telephonic interpretation. We don't use it very much." And I kind of knew where that conversation was going, but I asked the question anyways. I said, "How do you use the service? When you do use the service, how do you use it?" And the district told me that 95% of their telephonic interpretation calls were all for behavior issues. And,
Mm.
that it gave me pause. I felt a little down about that. And, I just realized that we're really missing a tremendous opportunity to engage these families. And I know I sound a little bit like Ted Lasso when I talk about this, but there's such a tremendous opportunity in our school systems to promote positive student achievement, especially for multilingual families. And we talk about
Mm.
inclusivity, and we talk about wanting to be more engaged with multilingual families across the country. But this is not a request that I've heard, or a situation that I've heard just one time, where we're taking a reactive stance towards language access within K-12 schools. There is such a tremendous
Mm.
opportunity to be proactive in response to multilingual families and to drive engagement. And like telephonic interpretation comes at a price point of pennies on the dollar. And,
Yeah.
just that one phone call home could make such a difference in that family's life, in that student's life, in getting them to come to the parent teacher conferences and getting them to build a relationship there with that school district. So, I got to be honest with you, Ashley, like my first thought when I heard that for the first time, from this large school district was maybe I'm in the wrong seat. Right. And then as
Mm.
I thought about it more and I thought about my mission and I thought about what I'm trying to do, I'm in the right seat. I'm absolutely in
Yeah.
the right seat. But my goal is to flip those standards, right? It's to
Yep.
inspire school leaders across the country to take a more proactive response to language access. It's it would fill my heart if these school districts would come to me and say, "Hey, Mark, you know what? We thought about it. We've readdressed our engagements." And I understand that we don't have unlimited budgets, we don't have unlimited time in our day, but I think there is a tremendous opportunity as I think about engagement strategies all across the country to be more proactive in reaching out to our multilingual families in their homes to drive engagement and to bring us all in.
Right.
So um, I really appreciate, Ashley, for you taking the time today and talking to us a little bit about the special education process. I'm very
Yeah.
grateful to all the partners that I have from all across the country who are doing tremendous work in language access. Of course, it's an effort that we're going to continue to make. But if anything that we talked about today inspired questions, and I hope as I cancel this out and get into the Q&A, there'll be some questions in there that we can talk a little bit more about. But I just really hope that we continue to make such tremendous strides in terms of driving, language access and giving folks meaningful participation to their sons and daughters' educations. And I know District 70 is so fortunate to have you, Ashley, as a champion for language access there.
Well,
And
thanks.
I'm very grateful for them for letting us spend some time together chatting today. So thank you again for
Yeah,
all that. And
of
it's been a really
course.
good session. And I appreciate all the work that has gone into this presentation. So thank you so much. And, I'm not hard to find. I'm out here on the front lines promoting language access all across the country. So if you got questions, get at me. And, I'll look forward to addressing those with you guys individually if there are any. Looks like we got one
Right.
question in the box. Do schools usually provide translation of the IEPs? Well, yes,
Yep.
absolutely. You have to provide translations for IEPs, and that's a really important process. I've seen school districts do that, a variety of different ways. Some schools use, software that they have in place within their IEP management system to use translations that can have mixed results. We do a ton of machine translation with post editing for school districts across the country. When you have a school district with mature language glossaries, so Ashley mentioned all those different languages, all those different acronyms in there. If we can get
Yeah.
access to the language that you all want to be using, we can really do a tremendous job of leveraging machine translation technology, our language glossaries and translation memories. And then we have tremendous editors that work within our CAT tools to be
Yep.
able to provide the IEPs back to school districts in a timely fashion so they can get this information back to their families accurately and well in advance of their special education meetings. And
Yep.
we got another
Yeah. And
question here.
again, do they usually provide translation? We should. Legally, we are obligated to provide translation of all of our IEP, our special education paperwork.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
How did AI impact your work lately? That's a good question. So, within the language space, we've been early adopters of AI. I mean, I know people talk about AI and it seems like it just came out yesterday, but when you think about like what a CAT tool is, a computer assisted translation, that's been around since the 1990s.
hmm
And that is just a process that our translators use to work with repetition of text that's been translated previously. So when I explain to people who don't really understand the industry, I kind of refer to it as like predictive text, right? Like if I'm typing on my phone, like back in the day, if I'm typing on my phone and I'm going to try to say a word like, responsibility, if I type in RESP, it'll show me respect, it'll show me responsibility. I choose responsibility and I just work quickly through that text. And when there is repetition, and like in special education, in IEP documentation, there's a ton of repetition within those texts. So if we've translated this content for you one time, we can provide some really incredible cost savings, and that's been true for years and years and years. leveraging our CAT tools to be able to create that consistency, throughout that process. And then, of course, it leads to better quality output and much lower costs along the way. So AI is not new to us. Of course, we are, constantly evolving and adapting new technologies into our process. So, a lot more to come on that. We definitely have some exciting features and functions coming out in the weeks and months to come. So I'll be excited to continue to, promote those solutions. But, when I see a question like, how has AI impacted your work lately? If I go back, and I've been in this industry, about 8 years now. And I remember, kind of like, the old heads within the industry talking to me about, when CAT tools first came out, everybody thought the sky was falling and how are translators going to make their money and all of that. But, it's nothing new to us. And, it's certainly, with language, it's certainly an industry that continues to evolve. So that's been really wonderful to see.
You see this one, how can we help support families who are speakers of low incidence languages?
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about that?
I mean, when I've used the, Piedmont Global's our platform that we use for this, I've not had difficulty getting someone in a variety of languages. I think the best thing that I could say is one of the more low incidence languages, just making sure, like you had talked about, Mark, is scheduling in advance and making sure there's enough time to get the right person to do that interpretation. That's what my first thought that comes to mind. Maybe you have something else to share with that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we can support over 100 languages available on
Hmm.
demand. We support, more than 200 languages in total. So, I do, kind of goes back to that slide where we talked about knowing the right modality for the moment. And, sometimes with low incident languages, you might only be able to access services over the phone. And that's okay. So, just kind of having an understanding of what languages are supported through what modality is going to help you a lot. And, I think all students and all families, deserve and have a right to have meaningful participation in their children's education. And I
Yeah.
do appreciate that low incident languages can be challenging, can definitely create a bottleneck or a barrier. But, having
Yeah.
somebody like Ashley or a champion from Language Access within your district, and then being able to like promote the work that they're doing. And District 70 has done a tremendous job of talking about the work that Ashley's been doing, and sharing that information out with the community. So, now when, Ashley works at the administration building. So now if there's an issue at the middle school, who do you think they're going to call if they have a low incident language where they need to get a proper response? And, they're going to call Ashley,
Yeah.
and Ashley's going to call
Yeah.
me, and we're going to figure it out. So, um,
Yep.
I don't look at it as a challenge. I look at it as an opportunity. And I do think it's really important to create, the proper structure of supports and, provide professional development out into the school so that they know who the right people are in their community that they can call on to be able to provide these supports to families. And at
Yeah.
District 70, Ashley, and at your school district, if you don't have somebody for that, I hope you raise your hand and say, hey, I'll take that on, because it's really important work.
Yeah.
See what other questions we got in here. How can districts build systems to ensure language access is consistent across all schools, not just dependent on individual staff or principals? Melanie, that's an awesome question. So one of the things that I've done at Piedmont Global is develop professional development programs where we'll go on site with school districts, and we'll do that work for you. So it's always been really important for me to be able to do more than just be a provider of a commoditized solution, which sometimes language services can be viewed as, right. Pennies on the dollar for 200 plus languages and regional varieties across a handful of services. But at Piedmont Global, we do a lot more. We offer free professional development on our systems and
Yeah.
software, as well as best practices for working with language services in a K-12 setting. So that's a really important question. It takes effort. It takes a plan. But I'm happy to build that plan out with you guys, because I think it's really important work, and it ensures adoption. It ensures that those bottlenecks that we talk about within language access, they don't continue to crop up. They don't become a pain point for folks. We make it really easy for you to access the services consistently, confidently, and then it becomes second nature, because you're just you're just doing what you do every day, which is help these families and drive student outcomes. And that's what we're in the business of. And we're in the business of supporting you with that. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, and I'd say as a district, like, we made sure to identify who is trained. Like you're saying, I'm someone they go to, but we trained our ML teachers and our principals as well, so that they, every building has access to someone who knows how to use our system for accessing interpreters and translation. And I think that's been really important, that we could send a direct message to everyone saying, this is our system, this is what it looks like, and we've been trained in it. So here are your people that you can go to for that.
It's awesome. Yeah, you guys are doing great
Mhm.
work. Amazing. Well,
Nice.
if there's no more questions, okay, Melanie's got one more. For a district that's just beginning
Mhm.
to build its language access office, what advice would you give, especially to ensure that our systems and practices truly support and empower
Mhm.
families, not just meet compliance requirements? What can we do early on to build trust and make families feel genuinely included?
I'll say a few things to that. I think something that we did is I worked really closely with our ML department, with our teachers, to reach out to a lot of our families, using our different using the different types of modalities, making sure that we let them know that we have this available, that we're going to send communication home in multiple, in their language, and to make sure that they have access to everything, not just special ed paperwork, but everything, the flyers about, whatever we're doing at school. And I think one of the things you mentioned, Mark, is like that nice phone call that you can do. So you have, again, an authentic voice on the phone with you to talk. It's not just an email that's been translated. It's truly a conversation with a staff member, and, having that interpreter on that call, it really is helpful in connecting with families and making them know that we are actually reaching out, and that they do feel included with that. And I think the phone call, I mean, I think we've used that. If I look at our statistics of on the platform of how many of the different modalities we use, I think we use that phone call one a lot, and that's just to be able to connect with our parents, so they feel just as connected as any other parent that we would communicate with about things. So that's, I would say, just using the different modalities and making sure that parents are notified that they have the right to have access, whether it's been translation of documents or it's in interpretation, so that they can feel that they're fully versed in everything that's going on in the school.
Yeah, absolutely. I would add to that by saying, you want to share your reason why. Why are you building a language
Mm,
access office? Not only with those
right.
families at home, right, but with the staff. And as I said on the onset of this webinar, parent engagement is a catalyst for student success. So you can get on Google Scholar and you can type in parent engagement does, and you'll find countless examples of the impact that parent engagement has in terms of driving positive student outcomes. So, being able to take a look at some of those and say, why are we doing this type of work? Why is it important? Why am I raising my hand to be a champion for language access in these schools? It's not because I need another title or more work to do. Everyone's busy. Ashley
Mhm.
probably does, 1,000 different things across that district. But the reason that we do
Sure.
that work is because it leads to and drives positive student outcomes. So I think,
Yeah.
as you think about building out that office from the ground up, being able to share your reason why is really important.
Yeah, I get a specific example of that. I had a student who needed just intervention services, and that required a change in the schedule. And we couldn't have done that without the parent engaged in that. And we wanted to get the student the service they needed. A quick phone call, just explaining what that is. It answered that right away. We didn't have that access before. And, just sending an email. A lot of times people see emails and they're like, I don't know who this is or what this is about. I'm not responding. So having ability to actually speak with and have an interpreter with you, that's another, it's, Melanie, to answer your question, I think that's just, it's great to be able to do that more in person and personal kind of connection.
So I think we got
I
one
see
more
one
question
more
here.
on there, Mark. Yeah.
Yeah. How can we appropriately assess and provide feedback to interpreters about their service, especially for IEP meetings? Okay, that's really important to us in order to get feedback. So we do have a drop down box. It's like a 5-star rating within our um, portal. So we want to know how that call went, both
Hmm.
from a quality standpoint in terms of the actual conversation, We also want to know, how the call quality was, things like that. And one of the nice things about our scheduling platform, if you had a really good experience with one of our interpreters, of course, we want to know about it. But each of our interpreters is assigned an interpreter ID. You can let us know that experience was great. You'd love to have them come back time and time again. And we can, use those tags to be able to assign the same interpreter back to your district time and time again. So we definitely have those tools built into our systems, and that feedback is often, very welcome. Even if the feedback's not good, we welcome that as well. So I had a call, an engagement with a school district partner of mine, just a couple weeks ago, and it was IEP meeting, Spanish speaking family needed an interpreter, and the interpreter, it wasn't a good experience, and they let me know. And language can be subjective, right? So that happens from time to time. But what we were able to figure out was that interpreter that we assigned, he was from where was he from? Like Guatemala or Costa Rica, where the family was from, Central or South America. So there was like just a disconnect in terms of the dialect that was used, and it made for less than stellar experience. So while the interpreter was plenty qualified and had experience working within that in that setting, there was just a disconnect in terms of the accent and the culture. It made them feel like maybe he wasn't as proficient as he was. So in the future, because we have the ability to tag those interpreters by their by their interpreter ID number, we were able to say, hey, this interpreter is probably not the best fit for this school district. And, we have plenty of other work we can assign him to. So we'll have a conversation with them. There's nothing I can do about his accent. It's a beautiful accent and he's a great interpreter, but just not a fit for that family and perhaps that district. So we take interpreter feedback, we take client feedback very seriously, and we act on it.
Yeah.
Can you share your roles again, just for reference and notes? Ashley?
Yes, I'm Ashley Crown. I'm a student services coordinator in Libertyville.
Awesome. I'm Mark Byrne. I am a language access consultant at Piedmont Global. We just recently rebranded, so I keep wanting to say PGLS, which is now an organization that focuses on our federal business with our federal contracts, and now we are Piedmont Global. So I'm going to have to get used to saying that. We just launched that just last month. So Mark Byrne, language access consultant, Piedmont Global. All right. Well, any other questions? That was a lot of fun, guys. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you taking time out to chat with us. We really appreciate it. I'm not hard to find. If you have questions, get at me. I have great fun, and I love doing the work that I do. We really do privileged work here at Piedmont Global. I don't take that for granted. I'm so grateful to our partners across the country, including Ashley Crown at District 70 Schools. So thank you, guys. I appreciate it so much. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.